All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me on this webinar. For some of you that may have gone to a similar session at CEDIA, this will be, again, similar, but not exactly the same. I am going to have some live examples and demonstration here as well. And feel free to use the chat or raise your hands if you have questions as I'm going. I will do my best to stop and answer those and try to make this as interactive as possible. But I do want to get through this, so I may see your hand and keep going for a minute and then come back to you. The goal of this is to really go over the best practices for deploying a system that includes programming the system in Blueprint, uploading, deploying, as well as making some final adjustments after the uploading and customizing it, making sure that it is deployed the best for the end user. So we're going to start with Blueprint, and I'm going to review kind of at a high level what I recommend doing to every system as you deploy them to make it efficient at deploying. I know a lot of the systems are going to be different, but deploying them in the same fashion will make it easier and quicker for you to do. The first step to deploy any system is make sure that you're naming the host. That's critical for both you, the installer, when it shows up in your app, and the homeowner, especially if they have multiple homes. So to do that, you're going to double click on the host, open an inspector, and rename the device name. So now it says Johnson Residence. And once you do that, it shows up properly in your list, as opposed to just saying Savant host, Savant host, Savant host over and over and over again. Also, we want to make sure that you set your latitude and longitude. And I'll go through this as we are progressing through. It's important to do that so that both your astronomical time events or scenes will run properly, and the new feature of daylight mode will operate. That's part of 9.2 and higher. Another important piece to make sure that the app is configured properly is making sure that you have your services identified properly. So if you have cable provider, make sure that you select the proper cable provider as Verizon, Comcast, whatever your local area is. Now, for those of you outside the US, I know not all the brands are in there. There is going to be in future releases options for some custom icons or more stuff. No timeline on that, but that is something in the works. They acknowledge that that is something that needs to be added. But right now you're restricted to the list that's in there. No custom icons at this time. Zone grouping. Again, big systems that you have, say you have 10, 20 zones, and you want to break them up first floor, second floor, or TV zones, audio zones, lighting zones, however you want to break that up. That's going to be important to do to make the customer find their stuff easy. So you can see right here, there's this button that says all rooms. And when you click on that, it's going to open up into those groupings that you created. And now when they click on bedrooms, it's just going to list the bedroom zones. This is done in the zone organizing zone groups screen. And again, I'll show this to you when we do the live demo. Limiting access to zones. That's pretty important on touch panels. when you have a touch panel, say in a guest suite, you may not want the master bedroom or great room or garage, any of those areas available on that guest suite touch panel. You may just want the guest bedroom, guest bath, and the guest sitting area available. And what you're going to want to do is make sure that you limit those by creating a local user under Tools, Review, User Login Management. And that's going to allow you to create basically touch panel users that are local users to limit what zones those touch panels can access. And that's going to look something like this. Another thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that your services are named something logical to the end user. This is under Savant App Preferences, and you can rename these, and this is most important for the music servers. If you notice when you go in here, the music servers are never going to be really named something intelligent that the client's going to understand. So name it Music Server 1 or Johnny's Music, Jane's Music, something like that, so it makes sense to the end user. You can also organize and arrange how the services show up in the app in this screen. You must check that Use Custom Order checkbox in order for things to show up in that manner. If you don't, it's basically not going to pay attention to the way this is ordered. To that note, if that's unchecked, what it's going to do is organize things on what was used last or most recent. I already commented on this, naming the music servers. Make sure that you name them something, again, intelligent to the user so that they understand what they're going to be doing. When you name the music server, say you name it Music 1 or Jane's Music, something like that, what you're also going to want to do is make sure that you update the AirPlay stream name. If you don't update the AirPlay stream name, it's going to look something like this, where it says Savant Music, and they've pulled up Jane's Music, and they're not sure how, and maybe there's 3 of them, and all 3 of them show up Savant Music, Savant Music, Savant Music. So make sure that you go into the settings on the music server, which is in the app, and change the AirPlay name to match the actual service name that you've named that. Service paths and service options. In this particular example that I'm showing, you have a TV that obviously has speakers in it, but we're also taking the audio out and going to the living room speakers. So what's going to happen is you're going to generate 2 services to this living room TV for the Apple TV and 2 services for the cable TV. One's going to be the audio is going to come out of the TV speakers. The audio is going to come out of the living room speakers. Now, if you were to build this, generate services, upload and leave, the customer is going to say, well, I don't get it. Why when I select this cable TV, the volume doesn't work, and when I select this other volume TV or cable TV, the volume does work? And the reason is they're grabbing different speakers, and maybe the TV volume is up loud, and they're grabbing the ceiling speakers and they adjust it, and maybe they can hear it, but the sound is still coming out of the TV. So you have to make sure to manage those services and, manage those services. And this is where you're going to see that. So when you generate the services, you're going to see where the audio is coming out of. and you're going to see the other service that the audio is coming out of the stereo speakers. So what you're going to want to do is make sure to check also where the volume is coming from. And when you get the multiple service pads, you'll have to select through these to see where the actual volume control is coming from. So one other thing that I always recommend, especially on a larger system or where you have a lot of zones that are doing this, it's kind of tedious to go through that services window and find which ones you're not using. It's much easier to actually go and say, well, you know what, I'm not going to use the speakers on this living room TV. So we double click on the living room TV, we open up Inspector, and we uncheck the items we're not going to use. We're unchecking the amplifier, the stereo speakers, and the volume control. Now this isn't even an option. When we go to generate services, it's not even going to show up. We aren't going to get those duplicate services anymore. So instead of having to go through and very carefully see what we've done and which services we want, we can eliminate it before it's even generated. And now we're going to say, yep, we've got our cable TV service. It's coming out the right spot and we're good to go. Other things to make the end user be able to see this properly is cleaning up the data tables and the naming. Lighting is probably the most impacted by this because you're importing it, whether you did the lighting program or there was someone else in the company that did the lighting program, or even another lighting consultant on the project and they did the lighting program. And you're going to see something like Kit Island, ISLD. And if you leave it like that, that's going to show up in the app like that. And it's going to not really make sense to an end user, or maybe it does, but it's not going to look as nice. It's going to look like it's half complete. Update that. Make it say Kitchen Island. 3 pot lights north entry. Entry down lights. That's what makes sense to the end user. The 3 pot lights north entry, that makes sense to the lighting programmer. So make sure you spend the time to go through and update the names on that. And I do have a quick video on that. If you look on my YouTube channel, it's probably about a 10-15 minute video on how to quickly go through your lighting tables and import them pretty easily. Climate. So thermostats, when you place thermostats in Blueprint, they're going to take this name here. So the controller is going to have this name. This location is something that you can put in for the actual location of that thermostat. Master bedroom, master closet, wherever it physically exists. And these 2 names may match. So that's okay if they match. What you have to do next is make it intelligent. If you have 2 thermostats in the master bedroom, make sure they know this one's for the air conditioning, this one's for the radiant heat. And furthermore, go into the Savant app zone map screen and select the thermostats that are controlling those zones. So in the kitchen, we've unchecked the master bedroom AC and the master bedroom radiant because they don't affect that zone. Same thing with the master bedroom, we've unchecked the kitchen because it doesn't affect that zone. So I'm going to go through kind of a live demo of how I build a blueprint from scratch. And I'm going to show you a couple tips and tricks kind of as to how I do repeat actions and do it pretty quick. So here we have Blueprint. And, as I mentioned, the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we name this host something intelligent. So this is kind of the process that I go through when I'm building these. And it's the first step is building all the rooms. It makes it much easier for me to do this as opposed to going room by room. So I have my equipment rack. I've got my living room. Master bedroom. Oops. Okay. So I've created all my zones, and the way I lay this out in Blueprint, I'm very methodical in laying out my host, my controller, and any environmental items like thermostats, lighting control, and such like that. So I'm going to take my host and land it in here. I always need a network switch. And I always grab a large one. Now you notice I'm going to drag all of my items into the Blueprint view so that I'm putting things right in. And I'm not dragging twice by dragging into my tree on the left and then dragging it out. One of the other things, and I'll admit I'm a little bit of a crazy person, I like to keep everything nice and organized and minimized. So hitting this little green icon is actually going to shrink everything down. So it's only showing connected ports. So I'm going to make my connection to my host. So there's my network connection to my host. So the next things that I'm going to do is add all my devices. I have speakers in all my zones. So I'm going to grab generic stereo speakers. And I'm going to drag them out here. And I'm going to put it kind of here because this is the area I'd like to have it live in. And this choose the zone placement window. This pops up. Now I have speakers in all my zones. So I'm going to want to select living room, hold the shift key, select the theater. Now that selects all those zones. I'm going to use the zone as a prefix for the component name. And I'm going to do, I don't need the stereo word. I don't need it, everything to be long. So now this is going to create, look what this does. I just put speakers in all 5 zones with one drag and drop. They're all named intelligently: living room speakers, master bedroom speakers, master bath speakers. So now I can continue moving on with adding other things. So now let's say I want to put a TV in here. Everybody's favorite frame TV. So I'm going to put the frame TV, and I'm holding the, oops, holding the command button to do this. Don't want it there. Again, using the zone as the prefix. Now, I'm going to show you, I'm adding 3 of the same exact TVs to these 3 zones. But guess what? The theater doesn't actually have that frame TV. It has a, 95 Sony or whatever. I don't know if they make a 95. But I'm kind of using this as a little bit of a cheat because this is going to create my TVs for all 3 zones. And instead of having to then rename or name again the TV that I'm putting in the theater, I can go here. Well, this is not the right model, but this is just showing you the example. I can just go here and drag and drop and replace it. Now I didn't have to actually enter the name. It took the name from when I dragged all 3 of them in there. So again, adding 3 TVs, even though they may not be the same, and same thing with the speakers. I don't have stereo speakers in there. I have surround speakers. But that's much easier than having to type in the whole speakers thing multiple times. I dragged them in, landed all the speakers for the system, and moved on. So now I'm going to add a few more things. My cable boxes. My Apple TVs. I'm going to add an IP audio 50. Now, what I name it here is going to be by default the name of the audio stream. So I could put in here that this is the IP audio 50. But what I would recommend putting in here is however you're going to name the audio stream coming from this unit, put that in here. What that's going to do is give you continuity from this name here into System Monitor and also in the app. So if for whatever reason you need to troubleshoot something, Pandora's not working on Savant Music 1, you know exactly which component and blueprint that you're looking at. Notice I haven't made any connections yet. I'm just grabbing all my components and slapping them in my config. I'm also kind of being sloppy with them. But once I get all my components in here, let's see, I've got all my cable TVs, Apple TVs, TV speakers. Once I get all that stuff in there and my controllers, okay. Now I've got just about everything, and maybe I missed something, but I can at least start making some organizational moves and lay it out really how I want. So I'm going to take my music. I generally like I said, all my my host, my network gear, all my controllers, and any environmental thermostats, cameras, security systems, all that stuff, lighting. My next would be my sources. Now, this particular system that I laid out all has local sources, no shared sources. So I don't have any sources here, but if I did, I would have, cable 1, cable 2, or media server 1, media server 2, media server 3, things like that. They'd be listed right in this spot. But the only global thing I really have is my Savant music. Then the next thing I have are going to be all my zones. I lay them out here where my speakers and my TVs are like this. So I'm going to make my connections for my cable box. And for those of you that are wondering, I'm right-clicking on these ports to get this menu to pop up. I can also drag from here to the TV, but I find in this scenario, it's generally easier to just right-click. And as I'm finishing making my connections on these devices, I make them nice and small so they're out of the way. Oops. It's very important to put this sorry, hang on one second. It's very important to put this MAC address in here right away because I've found every once in a while the Wake on LAN may act a little funny if you don't put it in there the first time. So if you aren't sure of the MAC address at the time, that's fine. You can put it in there. And then what you do is you'll go and delete this network connection and then make it again at another time. And that generally clears up any Wake on LAN issues that you might have. So now I've got my living room all connected. Let's connect my speakers. And I'm just going to keep going through this to make all these connections. So one other thing that you can do is there's these zone regions, and they give you these background boxes, and you can grab on this bar and now drag the whole zone around. It's pretty helpful in these scenarios to be able to rearrange and relocate, as well as you can use these for color coding as to the type of zone that you may be using. So let's see here. Master bath. So one of the other things is if I have this deck zone with an amplifier, I kind of have two options. I can put the amplifier in here and make the trigger connection to show that the amp is triggered, and Savant will then control that. The other option is I can actually change these speakers to powered speakers, and now Savant will consider them to have an amplifier built in. And now I can connect this to my analog output. So in the theater, I have a receiver. So this is my switching piece. And again, I lay this all out so it flows left to right. So we're going to see my sources here on the left. Oops. And I grabbed such an old TV that doesn't even have an HDMI connection. Let's find a better TV. There we go. And theater receiver. So now, looking at the big picture here, I'm going to zoom out, and that's what that little bar at the bottom does, so you can see more. We can see kind of the organization that I've had in here. And there's a couple things in here that I want to point out. One is there's a couple different colored banners at the top. And this is a really good indicator of whether something is going to work or not. If the banner right here is gray, you're all good. It's going to work. If the banner is pink, all that means is I'm all set. I'm going to generate some services, but there's other things I can do that you haven't made connections for. For example, on the host, it can do the doorbell, and I haven't made the audio connection from the host to make that doorbell sound. So when I make that connection, that's one more service that it generates, and may or may not make that go gray based on other services that are available. Because I think this, with the Pro host, you also have the on-screen display service as well, which was used in older systems. The yellow banner or orange banner, however you want to look at it, that basically says, I'm not doing anything. So I'm not going to work. You can see that with the dots here in the side tray as well. And that basically says there is no control connection to this device. So what I'm going to do is make my control connection. And now we see that that yellow banner goes away. Same thing for this RAW2. I'm going to make my control connection. Now that yellow banner goes away. Again, guys, if there's questions, definitely just shoot me a little chat message and I can try to answer some questions as I'm going through this. But hopefully this is all fairly straightforward for everybody. The biggest thing that I'm trying to point out here is my organization of the flow of things left to right. I also know that I can look down this column right here. I'm going to see all my TVs. I'm going to look down the very right-hand side, and I'm going to see, let's just do this. I'm going to see all my speakers. Now, I've added zone regions, yellow with local gear and stereo speakers, pink with surround sound receivers. So here I know my audio is going to come out of my TV. Here I know the audio is going to come out of my surround speakers. So once I've done this and made all my connections, I generally recommend saving your file. So when we save, I have kind of a pretty specific method to saving these. It is going to be the customer's name, the version of software you're using, the date of the file, the programmer's initials, and the version number, so Rev 1. This is extremely helpful to be able to look at a file and know just about everything you'd need to know about it without opening it. So I know who the customer is. I know what version software. I know when this was worked on. I know who worked on it. So if I have a question on it, I can go to them. And I know what version it was for that day. So now I save this. And I'll get a bunch of errors because I haven't done everything, but I always recommend save so you have some incremental spots in case something were to happen, in case my computer were to die or the software was to crash or who knows what. So I'm going to now generate my services. And I'm going to then see a bunch of services listed here. And again, I'll say this multiple times, I'm kind of a crazy person. I like to have this nice and neat and organized, whether it's a small system or a big system. I don't like to see a lot of stuff in here that's not getting used. And I'll show you, this is just an example of all the items that are, all the services available in the whole system. I'm going to click done here, and we're going to see in each zone. So the deck, I have an HVAC service from the Lutron. I have a shade service from Lutron, a fan service, a door lock, a garage. I'm not using any of those. I'm using lights and shades. That's it. I also have a fan and lighting service from the host. I'm not using any of that. If I go to my living room, we're going to see the same thing over and over again. Now, this is a small system. The impact isn't going to be that huge. You could leave them there, and because you don't have anything in the data table, it's not going to be a big problem. But if you get in the habit of removing things you're not using, the larger systems will deploy easier. And for some of you, you may be working on large systems with 40, 50, 60 plus zones. Disabling just this one thing will significantly help the system in not generating a bunch of extra services that aren't needed. So the way we do that, just like I showed you in the slides, I'm going to go to, oh, you know what? Let me show you real quick before I do this, the theater. I don't have any services in the theater. So where's my cable TV and Apple TV service? If we notice, I've connected these to inputs, but I actually have to go in here and assign these inputs to actual programmed inputs on the receiver. So you have to match them up to how you programmed your receiver. So I'm going to grab HDMI 1, and I'm going to put it on the cable sat. Oops. Click on my theater receiver again. So my cable sat has HDMI 1. My Apple TV is, let's see, we'll put it on game TV. So HDMI 2, game TV. Now when I generate services and I go to my theater, this is what I was talking about earlier, where you're going to see Apple TV, Apple TV. One is coming from the TV speakers. One is coming from the surround speakers. Cable TV, cable TV. We can't leave it like that. That's going to confuse the customer. Now, if it were a bedroom and they specifically wanted both options, great. Don't leave the names the same like this. Have this be cable TV, TV speakers, cable TV, surround speakers. So now when they go to select it, now that's really long-winded. So you may not want it that long when they are selecting in the app, but make it so that it's clear to them as to what they're selecting. Now for this particular scenario, I don't want the two options. I just want one. So I could uncheck it here, and I could go up to this Apple TV and uncheck it there. That will suffice and make it work, but I like to go the step further and actually remove those so they're not even showing up, because guess what happens? I'm a service tech coming out to this job, and I'm adding a Roku because a customer asked for a Roku. So I put this Roku in the theater. Theater Roku. I make a network connection to it. And sorry, let's zoom in so it's not so small. And now I'm going to make my HDMI connection. Theater receiver. I have to go back in here, make sure that my input is assigned. Now I generate my services. Now, if I just unchecked like I did the first time, what's going to happen is I'm the service tech. I add the Roku. I do all the programming. Roku shows up. I upload and I leave. I have two Rokus. Again, I have to go back in here, find the right one, and uncheck it. So now look at all these unchecked items that are in here. So we can go in here to my TV, and I can go to the resources, and I'm not going to use the media server. I'm not going to use the stereo speakers, and I'm not going to use the TV. I'm just using it as a monitor. So now when I close that and I generate my services, look what happens in the theater. All those extra services are gone. My service tech can add the Roku and land it in there and not have to worry about the fact that he created duplicate services. I'm just going to get rid of this that I put in there earlier. One other thing, the Apple TV, it always adds control at the end. I don't like seeing that. again, my own personal pet peeve. You can leave it how you want. But again, I have all these radio raw and Gerber. So I'm going to go through all this devices and I'm going to check the resources that are in there. I'm not using. Go to my host. Not using this. Now, on these TVs, I'm actually using the speakers, but I'm not using as a TV source, and I'm not using the built-in media player. Now, for this particular example, I use the Frame TV. The Frame TV is not the media player. That's something separate. So the media player is the Netflix, Amazon Prime, those types of apps on there. So unchecking those two will prevent those services from generating. Now when I generate the services, that list is much smaller. I only have 2 lighting ROD 2 pieces. I only have 1 for the house. Now this Savant Music, this kind of breaks it apart into a bunch of independent groupings. You can decide whether it bothers you or not. It bothers me. So I actually go in here and I put these all in the same group. So it's just 1. This helps when you are using the service in multiple zones. When you rename this Savant Music 1 to Jane's Music or just Savant Music, they're all going to rename together. And I can rename that Apple TV control. In all my devices. Again, these are all the same things that are on the next screen, but because I edited them here, I like to hit this override services. So all the changes I made in this screen will now follow through to the next screen. So I'm going to hit done. And now look at this. The deck used to have services coming down to here. Now there's just a few services. Theater, again, just a few services. Very easy to look in here and see what's being used. And there's all these names are make sense to what we're using. So now that I've cleaned up my services, I want to enter in my branding icons. So I'm going to go in here. Verizon is my service provider. And that's an Apple TV. So now I've set all the branding. And we can see this under Review, Savant App Preferences. Now, this is that screen that I showed you in the slides where you can rearrange these. We want cable to be first, Apple TV, Roku, music. And in the phone, it's going to show you 4 icons. So those are the first 4 icons that are going to show you. Then the next page is going to be lighting and shades. And maybe I don't want it to be Savant Music, or maybe I do. I can click that, rename it here, or I can rename this one here. If I had multiple music servers, I could rename them in either way. Now, since I've done this, I want to check my use custom order. And on 9. I think it was 1, 9.1 and higher, you can now edit the home screen text. Actually, I correct, that's 9.2. 9.2. This is huge. When you're not at a home, if you're a yacht or an office or whatever, you can put in whatever you want. Conference. Or and that will show up on the main page of the app. So for commercial applications, or even I've had, oops, didn't mean to close that on you. I've had clients that wanted that to say Sky Lodge. That was their ski cabin in Utah. And but this is great because it'll change the name right on the app. And that is across all apps, touch panels, things like that. If you're on the what's called the home screen, the whole house view, that's the name that will be displayed. The next thing after branding icons and the Savant app organization, we need to do the latitude and longitude. Now, I cheat when I do this. So what I do is I go into the channel listing editor, and I want to put my zip code in here, but you'll see it's grayed out. So this use cloud-based channel listings is checked. I want to uncheck this. Now I can type in my zip code. I hit the enter key. I have to hit the enter key. And then I check this. Do I want to enable it? Yes, I do. But my zip code is still in there, which is great. Now when I hit this done message, my zip code is in here, and I can use this checkbox, and it'll automatically populate my latitude and longitude. I don't, the other option is if I hit this question mark, I can go to a website and then copy and paste the information in. I just like to type in my zip code and have it done that way. So we've made sure the branding is correct. We've organized the zone app information. I'm sorry, the app information. We've entered in the latitude and longitude. The next thing we need to do is a zone organization. Organize zone groups. Now, this is a small system. In my opinion, it doesn't really make sense to organize it, but this is the screen where you could say, take these zones and create a group. Take these. And you can also organize these, and you have to be a little patient. You have to click on this, wait for it to kind of be grayed like that. And then you have to drag them in a different order. And that's, so I want right there. And you have to be careful and to watch where that line is putting it, because you can dump this into another zone and it'll actually break up your group. So be patient in this window. It works great. You just have to kind of be slow and methodical with organizing. Now that we've done all this and we've kind of fine-toothed, gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb, I always recommend to save. Now we should just generate services real quick. And now we can save. You'll notice on here that it automatically added a date and time of the save. It didn't save over my original file. That's done right in preferences. And that's nice because if you screw something up or make a mistake, you can go back to your previous file and that is use revision dates in document name. So that will automatically append that every time you hit save. So you won't be overwriting your file every time you work on it. Some other things is default component widths. I leave mine to 200. That's why all my boxes are the same width. Again, I like everything neat and organized and lined up, so that's why I set it that way. So I've saved my config. The last thing that I need to do is actually put in the Savant UIDs. And again, there's a couple ways to do that. I like to copy and paste. You're less likely to make errors. And generally, I get notes saying, hey, this device with this UID is here. This device, this UID is here, and so on and so on. What I do is I go in here to Tools, Review, Savant IDs. And I get my list of all my Savant IDs. Now, this system is pretty small, so there's not a ton of them. But instead of me using my list, I go to my embedded scanner and now I can go here, this SMA 5000, that's the IP audio 50. So I can go Command C, Command V. Back to my embedded scanner. There's my 0012, Command C, Command V. I hope everybody knows you can't see hosts in here, so I have to go to System Monitor. Same thing, I highlight it, Command C, and then paste Command V. Now, I've done all that without having to type anything manually. Much more reliable. You're not going to get errors of, oh, I just typed the wrong number or something like that. Even when the tech or whoever installed it jots down the note, you can use that to verify, hey, the last 3 digits were 509 for the music server, for music server 1, and they were 429 for music server 2. And as I'm looking through this list, I can then say, okay, there's that one, and I can copy and paste from there. I don't have to type it all in manually. Once I've done that, I'm pretty much ready to save and upload. Hopefully that made sense to everyone. Again, with my organization in here of my system-wide devices here, my system sources, which I don't have any here, my switching, whether it's video or audio. So if I had cable boxes and say a video matrix, that box would go here. And then all my zones are off to the right. And again, keeping everything lined up so I can look down the row and see my TVs, my speakers, and any of my local sources and such organized pretty cleanly. So that's where I would save and then upload. All right, moving on. Yes, we will talk about scenes in a little bit. It'll be closer to the end. Moving on. Hopefully that was at least a review for some of you, or at least seeing how I quickly kind of add components and such to a device pretty quickly, or a config pretty quickly. So now we've uploaded our config, and we need to make sure that it is the best it can be for the end user. And I will circle back on the Wake on LAN question. So after we've uploaded, The Sorry, guys, I'm getting a few questions here. If you guys have any questions on what I was doing in Blueprint, definitely send them in right now, and I can answer a couple of them. One of the questions was in the service preference window, was I only unchecking what I didn't need to remove it? So yes, the answer is yes. So let me go back to that. So, and I'm not quite sure which part of the question you're looking for. So, for example, on this theater TV, I unchecked all the resources that I'm not going to use. So I'm never going to use the speakers on this theater TV. So I unchecked it here. I'm never going to use the tuner built into this TV because I have a cable box. So I'm getting rid of the TV source and the media player. Same thing. So I'm unchecking all of those. Now, when I go in to my services, those options aren't even showing up. So there's no option here with the Roku that's coming out of those TV speakers. Before there was two. There was one that came out the surround speakers and one that came out the TV speakers. So if I didn't uncheck it here on the TV, then I would need to uncheck it here. That way it's only showing up for one of the services that we actually wanted. Perfect. And since I'm in here, there was one other question about the wake on LAN. So what I've seen, what I've run into, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but if I'm making connections to TVs that need wake on LAN, and I go in here and maybe make my connection and don't enter in the MAC address the first time, then what happens is I may get unreliable wake on LAN interaction. I can't say it's always happens. I can't say it's one particular TV or not. I just find that every once in a while it's a little weird. So my solve to that is I actually remove this connection and I make this connection again to the network switch. And when prompted here, I enter the MAC address in here. If I enter the MAC address when prompted in this window, I generally never have issues with it wake on LAN. If I don't enter it in this window, I see weird instances of it. So that's my so-called solve for the wake on LAN piece. It's not a surefire all fix, but it's one thing I've noticed that if I don't know the MAC address now and I just hit OK here, I notice I get a little weird interactions sometimes. So, okay. So, hopefully that answered your guys' questions. Going back to after the upload. So after the upload, you are going to want to set some default volumes for particular services. So that is done right in System Monitor. And what you can do is on the actual zone, you can set a default volume for the zone in general. And then for individual services, you can set default volumes. Again, that's all right under the Services tab in System Monitor. There's a little edit volume, edit defaults, and you click on that to edit those. Keep in mind, Savant does its volumes is a 0 to 50. So in the remote, the the remote's going to display 0 to 100, but in Savant, in the programming aspect, it's all 0 to 50. So 100 is actually 50 in System Monitor. You can also set max and min volumes, and that's done under the Audio Controls tab. You select which SIPA or Savant device you're setting, and you select the zone, and now you can set the max and min volumes. Savant Central Management. I strongly encourage everybody to spend some time and look at that. If you haven't started using it, I strongly encourage you to start using it. It has gotten very, very powerful over the past, I'd say 6 months. And you are pretty much able to do anything through this that you could through System Monitor sitting in the house. Some things may need a little clarification and may need a little, training on that. I'll probably do some videos on that down the road, but I strongly encourage you to get your systems connected. And that is done right under host claiming. Systems 8.10 and higher can do this. And you will basically hit claim job, request integrator claim for this host. The admin on the system will get a prompt, integrators requesting access. And once that's approved, you will go ahead and you'll get approved and then have access through SCM. When you use SCM through the web to deploy configs, it does take between 2 to 5 minutes to actually push to the host. If after 5 minutes it has not pushed to the host, I would recommend rebooting the host and or re-uploading the config to the cloud and give that a shot to kind of clear up that issue where it won't deploy. Again, SCM gives you all these options. Under diagnostics, the command line interface, very, very powerful. They've added a lot to it. You actually can get RPM terminal based information through that diagnostics window now, which is tremendously helpful to see what's going on. You can also then use the iPad to connect and troubleshoot while on site. Remotes. Generally, remotes, when they're deployed, are probably a firmware version or 2 behind. So when you deploy a remote for the first time, make sure it's plugged in, make sure the zone's off. And if you're leaving that night and not coming back, try to force the software to update. The best way to do that is to power the remote off, place it in the dock, and it will start downloading the firmware right away. Depending on Wi-Fi connection, that can take anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. Once it's completed downloading, which you can monitor that in System Monitor, you'll have to go on the remote and hit the update now. Otherwise, it'll wait until 2 o'clock in the morning or about 2 o'clock in the morning to update. That way you can make sure that the customer isn't surprised when buttons change in the remote. The IP50s and 125s have speaker profiles built right in, and that will help tune the audio to the speakers that have been matched up with these profiles. Networks. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the networks. I'm just going to repeat over and over again. Use commercial grade stuff. Use robust hardware. Do not buy a Linksys piece from Best Buy and expect to run your AV system off of that. Make sure you're using Google's DNS. That will help eliminate issues with your music servers and allow all of your services inside to work properly. Wireless. Savant recommends 2.4 gig network, not a combo 5 gig 2.4 network. If you think about all of the communication that's happening, the 5 gig network has no benefit to any Savant gear. They are not transferring that much information. So your better bet is to use the 2.4 gig network with the further distance capabilities and have it isolated, whether you're creating its own SSID or through the house, you just say no 5 gig. And use WPA2 encryption. The other recommendation is to turn off roaming or smart select. Any of those advanced features are counterproductive to a lot of the remotes and other things in the system. So keep the network simple, and you should get a good, reliable setup. Now, getting into the app itself. You've uploaded it. You've fixed a few things in System Monitor to set default volumes and things like that. Now let's get the app set so that we can deliver it nicely to the end user. Take the pictures with your phone, not your iPad. The iPad camera is not as good as the phone, whether it's an Android or an iPhone. Take them in landscape mode and make sure the room looks nice. Or if it's still under construction, at least get something in there so it's not the default picture. The way you do that is you go into settings in the app, go to room settings, and then you can update all the pictures for all the zones. Only takes a couple minutes. It makes the end result to the customer much more satisfactory for them to look at. Make sure you set up the favorites. Don't leave it for them. It'll take you a minute or two as the admin. You punch in the zip code, you select the provider, and that way when they go to add favorites, which again, I would actually recommend you add a few favorites, they're already in there. They're not saying, oh, well, I have to hit the plus icon and type everything in. No, when you hit the plus icon, you get a list of all the available favorites, and you just hit the little check boxes next to the channels you want to show up in favorites. Much, much easier to do right away. That way, when the customer goes to play with the favorites, it just works. Scenes. I always recommend creating 1 or 2 scenes and walking the customer through that just so they can see it. One of the scenes is house off, all the lights off, all the AV off, things like that. Or you know, maybe they've already laid out some very specifics on what they try to do. Create that scene. Whether it's a lighting or AV or combo, create 1 or 2 scenes, put them in there so that they can show them. Now, one of the things I always recommend is if you're having a lighting control, whether it's Savant or Lutron or Vantage or whoever's lighting system it is, I always recommend putting the lighting scenes here in Savant, not in the lighting controller. That gives the customer much more access and much more flexibility to be able to change it to what they want without generating a service call. So when creating lighting scenes, try to put it into the Savant system. If the client wants voice services, walk the client through that. Now they're going to need their own Amazon account or their own Google account to get those to work, and just walk them through it. If you're using Siri, you're going to need the customer's Apple account and walk through the setup of that. There is a documentation in the knowledge base for that, walks you through step by step. It is fairly kind of specific to the end user's iTunes account. And if you're nervous that they forget their iTunes password or change it often or things like that, I would recommend not really doing it unless they are fully comfortable with knowing that every time they change their iTunes password, they are potentially going to break that connection. So read through the documentation. It is an awesome integration. I use it in my house. It works beautifully. I don't change my iTunes password every couple days because I forget it or whatever. So that's kind of set the expectation to the customer. Configure the music services. Get their information, log the music servers in. If you have 3 music servers, you have to set them up on all 3 music servers. Spend the time, do that before before you deliver the system to them. If you have touch panels, set up the wake up screens. Make sure that when they walk up to the master bedroom touch panel, if they're using it mostly for lighting, make sure you put the lighting page as the wake up screen. If they're using it for music, have the music service or have scenes. Choose what makes sense for that location. If it's the home page, it's the home page. That's fine. But if you set it up, the customer is going to find the usability much better for that touch panel. Training the clients. Now, I have several different opinions on this. The first opinion is give the customer the app, let them play with it or suffer with it for a day or two, then you give them the training. What you're going to want to do when you actually give them the training, though, is go over the scenes, show them how to change the pictures in the app, show them how to create another user, show them how to do notifications. If you set up voice control, show them how to do voice control. There's also the availability of the at a glance for the Pro app and the Pro remote on the Savant website. Excellent, excellent resources. They're PDF documents. You can email them to the client. I believe if you request them, you can still get hard copies of them. And I think that information is right on the Savant sales page, sales resources page. But those are great, great resources. And there's our buddy Ian. He helped the client add the nanny, the housekeeper, the son, the daughter, the husband, the wife, whoever needs to be added to the system. Explain this part, that you are the technician and that you have access. Explain how that will help you service their account without having to roll a truck every time. Explain to them that if they don't want you to have that access, they can remove that, but then you may have to roll a truck to make that happen. So just make sure that you set the customer's expectations and have them aware. And this is the integrator access. Make sure that you set the expires to never. By default, it's set for 24 hours. So if you just get authorized for access, it will be gone the next day. Make sure you change this in the app to never so that you can keep that access ongoing, or at least show the the client so that they can change it as needed, because maybe they don't want you to have access all the time. If your access expires, they can always click this to re-enable your access for 24 hours. That is it for what I have